Here is a number that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. The average gas station in the United States makes between 3 and 7 cents of profit per gallon of gasoline sold. 3 to 7 cents, not 3 to 7%, cents. On a gallon that might sell for around $3.50, the station operator is keeping less than 2% of what you hand over at the pump. The other 98% flows through to the refiner that produced the fuel, the distributor that moved it, and the federal and state taxes baked into the price before you ever see it on the sign. And yet there are over 140,000 gas stations across the United States. They sit on some of the most valuable commercial real estate in the country: the corner lots, the highway exits, the intersections everyone drives through. Building one from scratch costs well over $1 million, sometimes several million. Somebody is willing to make that bet over and over again on a product that returns pennies per unit sold. Either every gas station owner in America is making a catastrophic financial mistake, or there is something happening at these locations that has almost nothing to do with the gasoline. There is. And by the end of this, you will understand why the gas station is not really in the fuel business at all. And what happens when that fact stops being enough to keep the lights on. Let's start with the part everyone already sort of knows, but rarely sees laid out clearly: the economics of fuel itself. A gallon of gasoline is a commodity. The station did not manufacture it, did not refine it, and in most cases had very little say over its price. Roughly half of what you pay at the pump reflects the cost of crude oil. Federal and state taxes take another meaningful slice. In most states, somewhere between 15 and 60 cents per gallon, depending on where you are. Refining and distribution take a share as well. What's left over for the retailer, the actual station, is a razor-thin sliver. And that sliver has to cover the cost of the electricity running the pumps, the credit card processing fees on every transaction, the labor behind the counter, and the insurance on the property. Credit card fees alone are a bigger drag on margin than most people assume. Every time a customer pays at the pump with a card, the station typically pays somewhere around 2 to 3% of the transaction to the card networks and banks. On a $50 fill-up, that can eat several cents of the already thin fuel margin before the station has paid for anything else. This is why gas prices swing so dramatically, and yet somehow the stations rarely seem to be either wildly profitable or catastrophically unprofitable. They are not the ones setting the wholesale price of oil, and they are not the ones benefiting when prices spike. When crude oil costs go up, the station has to raise pump prices just to preserve that same 3 to 7 cent sliver. The angry customer at the pump, glaring at the price on the sign, is usually glaring at the wrong target. The station is a pass-through. It is not the villain of the gas price story. It is closer to a bystander with a very good view. So if the fuel itself is close to a break-even proposition, why does the modern gas station look the way it does? Why is there a bright, well-lit convenience store attached to almost every one of them, selling coffee, energy drinks, hot food, lottery tickets, and phone chargers? Because that store is where the actual business happens. Non-fuel sales, everything inside the convenience store, typically make up around a third of a gas station's total revenue, but generate close to 2/3 or more of its total profit. Let that asymmetry sink in. The product the business is named after generates the minority of the profit. The snacks, drinks, and impulse purchases generate the majority. The gross margin on a bottle of water or a bag of chips is dramatically higher than the gross margin on a gallon of gas, often somewhere in the range of 30 to 50% compared to the low single digits on fuel. A customer who spends $40 filling their tank and then walks in for a $5 coffee has just generated more pure profit from that coffee than from the entire tank of gas. This reframes the entire physical layout of a gas station. The pumps outside are not the profit center. They are the customer acquisition system. The 80-foot canopy, the illuminated price sign visible from the highway, the whole multi-million-dollar forecourt. All of it exists to perform one job: get a car to stop, and get the driver to walk through the front door. Once you see the gas station this way, the entire industry makes more sense. It is not a fuel company with a shop attached to it. It is a convenience retailer that uses cheap, highly visible fuel as bait. The most successful operators in this space have taken that logic to its extreme conclusion. Some locations have expanded into full-scale food service, with kitchens producing meals that rival fast casual restaurants. Some have built car washes on site, which carry their own healthy margins and give customers a second reason to stop. Some have built loyalty apps that track purchase habits and nudge customers back with personalized offers. A handful of chains, particularly in parts of the country with long highway stretches, have built stores so large and so elaborate that fuel is almost an afterthought. Destinations in their own right, where the gasoline is essentially a courtesy on the way to the retail experience inside. But most gas stations are not that. Most are small, independently owned, single-location businesses. And for them, the math looks considerably less glamorous. Building a new gas station from the ground up, including the land, the underground fuel tanks, the pumps, the canopy, and the convenience store structure, typically runs somewhere between $1.5 and $4 million, depending on the market and the size of the build. That is before a single gallon has been sold. The equipment inside, walk-in coolers, food service equipment, point-of-sale systems, adds more on top of that. After all operating costs, fuel margin, in-store margin, payroll, utilities, insurance, credit card fees, rent or debt service, a typical independent, single-location gas station owner takes home somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $150,000 a year. A strong location with a busy convenience store and good visibility can do considerably better. A weak location, off the main road or facing new competition, can fall well below that. For a business that may have required well over $1 million to open, that is a modest, unglamorous return, closer to the economics of running a small restaurant than the economics of an oil company. And underneath all of this, quite literally underneath it, sits the part of the gas station business that almost nobody thinks about until it becomes a problem. What is buried in the ground? Every gas station with underground fuel tanks is sitting on top of large steel or fiberglass containers, often holding thousands of gallons of gasoline each, connected by a network of underground piping. These tanks have a functional lifespan, typically somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 years, and across the country, a meaningful share of the underground tanks currently in use are approaching or have already passed that age. Tanks corrode. Piping develops small leaks. And when that happens, the fuel does not simply sit there. It moves through soil. It can reach groundwater, the same groundwater that roughly half the country depends on for drinking water. Since regulators began tracking this seriously in the late 1980s, there have been more than 500,000 confirmed leaks or releases from underground storage tanks in the United States. Many have been cleaned up. Many are still being cleaned up. The federal government estimates that the average cleanup for a leaking tank costs somewhere around $130,000. And when groundwater contamination is involved, that number can climb past $1 million for a single site. Here is the detail that matters most for anyone thinking about owning one of these properties. Under federal and most state law, financial responsibility for a leak generally falls on whoever owns or operates the tank system when the leak is discovered, not necessarily whoever originally caused it, and not the oil company that supplied the fuel. If you buy a gas station and it turns out a decades-old tank underneath the property has been slowly leaking, that liability can become yours, often without any visible warning sign above ground. This is precisely why environmental due diligence, soil testing, tank age verification, tightness testing, is treated as a non-negotiable step before any serious acquisition. It is also why federal regulations require most tank owners to carry a minimum of roughly $1 million in coverage per incident to handle exactly this scenario. In some states, that private insurance market has grown so wary of aging infrastructure that state-run backstop funds have had to step in, because private insurers alone were not willing to absorb the risk. The gas station, in other words, is not just a thin-margin retail business. It is a thin-margin retail business built directly on top of a long-tail environmental liability that can, in a worst-case scenario, erase decades of modest profits in a single event. And now, there is a third pressure building on top of the first two, one that is reshaping the entire long-term outlook for the industry. Electric vehicles do not need gasoline. That sentence sounds almost too obvious to say out loud, but its implications for an industry built entirely around the sale of liquid fuel are enormous. Global electric vehicle sales passed 17 million units in a recent year, accounting for more than 1 in 5 new cars sold worldwide. In the United States specifically, adoption has moved more unevenly, faster in some states, much slower in others, shaped heavily by shifting incentives and regulations. But the long-term direction has been consistently downward for gasoline demand per vehicle on the road, even as total miles driven continues to grow. Industry analysts have modeled what this could mean over the next decade. One widely cited projection suggests that up to a quarter of fuel retail locations in the United States could become unprofitable by the mid-2030s as gasoline demand erodes, with fuel profits in the most EV-heavy markets potentially falling by more than half. In states pushing the most aggressive vehicle electrification targets, some analyses put the share of potentially unprofitable stations even higher over that same horizon. This is not a story about gas stations disappearing overnight. Fuel demand does not fall off a cliff. It erodes gradually, market by market, as the vehicle fleet slowly turns over. But it is a story about a business that already operates on razor-thin fuel margins, facing a future where the one product it is named after may generate meaningfully less volume than it does today. The industry's own trade associations have been telling operators, increasingly bluntly, that the future of the business lives inside the store, not at the pump. Expand food service, build loyalty programs, reduce dependence on the product printed on the sign out front. Some operators are also installing electric vehicle charging alongside traditional pumps. And the early data on this is genuinely interesting. An EV driver typically spends 20 to 30 minutes charging, compared to the 2 or 3 minutes it takes to fill a gas tank. Research suggests EV drivers walk into the attached convenience store more often than gasoline customers, and spend more once they're inside, because they have nowhere else to be for half an hour. The 20 minutes a gas station used to lose out on May become the very thing that makes the store, rather than the pump, the actual center of the business. The retrofit is not simple or cheap. Installing meaningful EV charging infrastructure on top of a property that may have already cost well over $1 million to build is another significant capital outlay layered on top of a business that was already operating on thin margins. For some operators, particularly smaller independent owners, that additional investment may not be feasible at all. The number of gas stations in the United States has been slowly declining for years, even before the more recent EV pressure became a serious factor. Thin margins, rising real estate values that make some locations more valuable, sold for redevelopment than operated as fuel stops, and the sheer cost of running an aging facility have already been quietly consolidating the industry for decades, favoring larger chains with the scale to negotiate better fuel pricing and fund bigger, more elaborate stores. What the gas station ultimately reveals is a business that most people misunderstand at almost every level. It looks, from the outside, like it should be one of the simplest and most predictable businesses imaginable. A product everyone needs, sold at a highly visible location, purchased with total regularity. And underneath that simplicity is a business running on almost no margin from its namesake product, carrying a hidden environmental liability buried directly beneath its foundation, and facing a slow but real structural shift in the very demand that built the industry in the first place. The gas station survives not because of the gasoline, but despite it. What keeps the lights on is the coffee, the snacks, the loyalty app, and increasingly, the 20 minutes a driver spends waiting for a battery to charge instead of a tank to fill. The sign out front still says fuel. The business, if you look closely enough, has been about something else for a very long time. Subscribe to the Economics Machine. Every week, we take something you've driven past 1,000 times and show you what is actually keeping it in business.